Hi, I'm having a conversation with Judy Mooney. Judy, can you tell us a little bit about your life before you became a sculptor?
I can. It was quite a ride. I raised 3 children and then went to work at the YMCA thinking I was going to be a programmer and I was going to run programs, primarily swimming programs. And before I knew it, I was running the YMCA. During that time, we ran a program called Black Achievers, and I got involved in the African American community and working with kids. And it was probably one of the most meaningful times in my life. And from there, I went to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I specialized in running inner city Ys. I ran the 3 inner city Ys in Charlotte and ran a program there called Freedom School that Marion Wright Edelman developed.
So, when did you start and what inspired you to begin to do sculpture?
So I came to this work out of retirement. When I retired from the Y, I worked at the Y for 20 years. And when I retired, Pat Mooney said to me, you need to find something to do because I don't need a manager. And I had been managing for years. And so I went out to Armstrong thinking I was going to be a potter. And I could just put my hands in clay and forget the world. And I did. And it was great. And one day the professor said to me, why don't you take this sculpture class? Well, I'm firmly convinced he just needed one more student to make that class. And, but I took it, and I realized that I could look at somebody and sculpt them. And from that point on, my life changed. I went from not knowing anything at all about sculpting a figure or a human to wanting to know everything. When I sculpted my first figure, my first head, I got a good likeness, and that shocked me. And I was afraid that I was going to lose it. It was like every time I walked away from it, I thought, I'll never be able to come back and do this again. I studied at Armstrong for 3 years, and then I began to take classes. I took some classes at SCAD, and then I took workshops. I still take a workshop a year just to increase the knowledge of what I'm doing and expand what I'm doing.
And how long ago was it that you started getting into the art world and becoming a sculptor?
13 years ago.
So in 13 years, you've moved from making that first clay head into doing bronze sculptures.
Well, it's been about 10 years with the sculpture, because I started throwing pots 13 years ago. And that's a relatively different thing. And so once I found out I could sculpt, then it was learning the anatomy, it was learning how to manipulate the clay, and many different things that really don't go into making a pot or a vessel.
And when was it that you got rid of your throwing wheel?
I think it was about 25.
Yeah.
I guess it was. I guess about 2 years after I got into to sculpture that I sold the wheel.
You realized that was sculpture was your home.
That's right.
And you weren't going to make any more vases or cups.
That's right.
Most people know very little bit about the process of making bronze sculptures. Could you talk to us about that process from the time you begin to have an idea all the way through the execution and actually taking the sculpture to the gallery?
Really, the first step is research, because my subject has been and is the Gullah culture and their community. And so I began to do research early on. So that is the first step. And once there's a story that has captivated my attention, then from there I begin to put together maquettes to see what the composition's going to look like.
Maquettes?
Small sculptures, little small sculptures. And I'll play with their positions and their movement and you know, where their head's going to be. And then from that point, I go into modeling the sculpture. Now, in a bronze sculpture, I use an oil-based clay called plasticine. And the thing that's different about it is it doesn't dry out. It'll stay firm forever if I don't touch it. You know, if I don't heat it, it'll stay firm. And so I can leave it unwrapped, and every time I walk into the studio, I see it in a new light. So there's a real advantage for me to work in plasticine, but I begin to model the figure then in plasticine to prepare it for the bronze process. The process is 15 steps long, and so it's quite involved. I have been through the whole process 2 or 3 times, but now for me it's a collaboration because I send part of the work off to the foundry to be done. But I had to understand it to be able to communicate with the foundry. The first step is, as I said, modeling the image of whatever story has come to me. And those stories really do come to me. People bring me stories about the people and actually sometimes introduce me to people who their ancestors had stories and they are carrying out that tradition. So like the net maker. But so I have my sculpture and I have finished shaping it and it's satisfying to me. It's saying what it needs to say.
Do you use a model when you do this, or do you use pictures, or how do you determine what it's going to look like when you start that process?
Many times I use a model and then I work from pictures. I'll start and when I first start, I'll get the figure right, the anatomy right, and I'll use a model for that. Then I'll pose that figure, and then I'll photograph it. And I'll use the photographs to sculpt by, and then I'll come back and have a model just to check that when they bend over, that fold on that dress is going to look like I have it, or, you know, or the foot is in the right place. So I use a model 2 different times. This process takes me about a month. I probably could rush it through in a couple of weeks, but I like to have time for it to live with me because it really comes to life during this time. There's a certain period where you know that figure I name them about midway through that point because they have a life then, and all of a sudden they're a person to me.
And so you know when they're done because they talk to you and say, I'm done.
That's right.
Okay. After you've made the sculpture, what is the next step?
The next step is to make a mold, because to produce it in bronze, you have to have a mold. And you would think, well, okay, I'm going to make a mold and that's going to be the final step. It's not. The mold then holds wax. You pour wax into that mold and you get a positive image of that sculpture. The wax is it's a silicone mold and with a plaster mother mold. And it's quite a process. When you're finished with that and the wax is poured, you peel the rubber off of it, and you have an exact image, I should say. You have an exact image of your sculpture. You then have to prepare it to be poured. And to do that, you're going to have to do what they call gate and sprue. And these are pieces of wax that you add to the sculpture. And you run a coil of wax that'll take the air out of the sculpture so it doesn't trap any air in. But you also have to, the gates are the pieces of wax that connect from that coil to the main sculpture. So you'll see the figure now with all these attachments to it, but those are to prevent air bubbles in the actual pour.
Okay. Once you've got it gated and sprued, what is the next step?
The next step is the ceramic shell. and you mix a ceramic mixture, and then you have sand and fiberglass pits, and you dip that wax figure into the ceramic shell, and then you take that wet and dip it into the sand. You do that probably 7 or 8 times to build up a nice heavy shell. You have to dry it in between, but you've got a really firm ceramic shell around the wax.
So it starts off as a slurry, and you build it up, you let it harden until you've developed a shell around it so that you can put the bronze in.
Yes, but you don't put the bronze in immediately. You put it in a kiln, and it melts the wax out, hence lost wax. Once the wax you can reuse the wax many times. So once the wax is melted out into a pan, then you have a shell or a mold again for your figure. You turn that over, and that is when the molten metal, the bronze, is poured in it. And once that process is finished, then you take that ceramic shell that is filled with bronze and throw it into a tub of water and cool it down, and then break the shell. You use a hammer and chisel, and you start to break the shell. Now, we'll use the word chasing, and that means cleaning. And this is probably the most difficult part to clean because you've got to get all that ceramic shell off of that bronze. And so the process of chasing and cleaning that sculpture is the next step.
And is that when you cut off the channels to pour the wax in?
Yep.
And the wax out? And so at that point, you basically clean all that, all the supporting structures off so that you again have the sculpture.
Yes.
But that's not the end, is it?
No, it's not. Because then there's welding, you've got some places on it you've got to fix, you've got little holes you've got to fill, and so there's much welding and other work that goes into it. You're back to taking tools and redefining lines that might have gotten moved during the whole molding process. And so once it's all clean, you think, oh yeah, I'm finished. But you don't. You put it back. At one step of the cleaning, you have to sandblast it. And there's a large machine you put it into that sandblasts it. Well, you end up sandblasting it about 3 times. And so the final sandblast, you have to be sure you have rubber gloves on because you don't want to get any of your finger oils onto the bronze. And then you prepare it for color. And that's called patina. And the patina process, you have to heat the bronze, so you use a torch to heat the bronze, and once the bronze is heated, you spray it with a chemical. On the piece I just finished, I actually used 2 different patinas, and so I would get a darker one, and then I would take a Scotch-Brite and clean it down, and then I would spray it with a lighter reddish brown. And you go back and forth until you get the color you want. And then the final step is to wax it. And that seals your color on it. So once I've gotten the waxing done, you think, oh great, this is ready. But no, it's not. You have to prepare it for the base. And so you have to, for my particular piece, you have to decide how you're going to mount it. And this particular piece, I just put it on a block of wood. And you have to tap the screw into the metal. So you have to find a point on that where and if you don't have one, that's part of your welding process. You have to put you have to put a little piece of bronze that's going to hold that screw when you get ready to attach it to the base. But the base has to be prepared. This particular base is wood. Some of my bases are marble. You know, it's just a different depending on what I decide to use.
Right. Now, these pieces almost come to life. Do you feel like you have a personal relationship with the piece or with the subjects?
Very much so. I guess that comes in the early process of molding. Once I name them, they have a life. And that life continues all the way through, you know. And you talk to them. I'll find myself chasing it, and I'll have a little pick and hammering away to get some of that shell out and go, oh, I didn't mean to hurt you. But you do. You develop a life. They develop a life, and you develop a relationship with them. So.
And the real subjects, the living, breathing people, are they still alive, or are they dead, or?
It's interesting. Some of them are. The net maker is alive. He's been making nets since he was 12 years old, and I got to go spend a day with him, and it was wonderful. He only speaks Gullah, so his grandchildren interpreted for me.
And how old is he?
He's 89. And so it was wonderful to spend some time with him and to hear about his life and watch him make nets. His hands are fantastic. His fingers are nimble, and he moves the strings around, you know. He calls it sewing, but it's quite interesting. But I don't have that luxury all the time. Many times, like the Crab Lady, it's a story. The Crab Lady's a story about a woman who lived on Defusky, and she would bring her crabs to the market, to City Market in Savannah, every Saturday to sell. And she had a little jingle, she would say. She'd put those crabs in one of the sweetgrass baskets on her head, and she'd say, "Crab-eye." And people remember, as children, going to the market and seeing the Crab Lady. So I built her out of a story. So I used many images, and that's where I worked. I got a model to get the sculpture right, to get the physical body right. But then I used pictures and just, you know, used a composition of pictures that helped me create that.
In these 10 to 13 years, you've come a long way. What would you like to see it become? What new subject areas are you interested in?
I have no idea. One of the things about this art is it's led me. I don't lead it. I think that I've got about 4 more stories that I want to create. Now, that could change, because as I get to working on the last one, there will either be another story that comes to me, or I'll move in a different direction. One of the things I enjoyed that I would like to pursue is the bird. I love doing the girl with the bird because it was a challenge. It was different. Although every face is a challenge because their structures are different, and trying to capture their feeling is a challenge. So I don't know. I might be doing this the rest of my life, and then I might be doing some others. But the stories come to me kind of at the end of a sculpture. I already know what the next one's going to be. So
you're primed.
Yeah. But it's not something I always look for. It comes to me during the process.
And have you enjoyed it?
Yes, I've enjoyed it. It is wonderful. It's one of the most rewarding things that I've done, you know, to be able to go and create a sculpture that then is going to have life after whatever, you know. It's my second retirement plan because these sculptures live on.
Do you sculpt every day?
Most days I'm in the studio, and it's a wonderful place to be.
Thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you.